So Christian, thank you for agreeing to interview for our InspirAsians campaign. Christian Guerrero is a proud immigrant from the Philippines and currently works as a project manager in the nonprofit sector within the domains of marketing and communications and social impact. He also holds an undergraduate degree in social welfare from UC Berkeley with a minor in global poverty and practice. So first off, happy AAPI Heritage Month, and we are so delighted to have you today, Christian.
Happy AAPI Heritage Month as well. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm very grateful for the reach out and for the opportunity to share.
As we kind of mentioned in the short little bio, Christian, you immigrated from the Philippines at the age of 12. Could
Yep.
you share with us a little bit about your immigration story and the impact it has had on your adolescence and kind of what it brings into, how it has shaped you as a person today?
I think one what one point that was the biggest was this pressure to assimilate. I moved when I was 12. I moved down to LA actually. And interestingly enough, it was a predominantly mix of the Mexican community and an immigrant Chinese slash Vietnamese community. And so while that was cool in a sense in terms of the diversity of culture, I also felt there was still that overarching pressure to be quote unquote American because I had an accent. I got made fun of for my accent. There was barely any Filipinos. No one really knew yet what a Filipino was, right? And then of course there were some of the more racist kind of jokes, right? During middle school, of course, it is middle school. And I think what made it interesting was my idea of America was based on Walt Disney and Nickelodeon, right? When I was in the Philippines. So, of course, no one really looked like me. It was mainly like white folks and Lizzie McGuire and like Full House, things like that. So, I actually had this mentality of wanting to be white. I bought a bunch of Abercrombie and Fitch. I wore Hollister and all that. And so that was one of those pressures. I think the other aspect in terms of immigrating that made it tough was the family separation. So my mom was the one who was able to immigrate to the US because we were petitioned by my Lola, my grandma, but my dad was left in the Philippines because they weren't officially married in the Philippines. So, of course, that divide caused relationship troubles. And also at the same time, I didn't really have like a male role model at home, right? So I had my ups and downs there. And so it's something that I'm grateful to have experienced and grown from, right? But it's definitely not ideal. So I think overall, I'm definitely grateful to be able to immigrate, especially after doing community work back in the Philippines and realizing my privilege to be able to immigrate and get a good education in the US and live here in the US and have a job in comparison to other folks in the Philippines who can't even fly out of the country, right? So it's a mix of, yes, I've had my own personal struggles, but at the same time, acknowledging the blessings and privilege that I have to be able to immigrate. Right. So I'm still in that middle ground. I am a Libra, so I try to find a balance in things. And I think that's where I'm at right now with my kind of immigration story.
I mean, obviously, so I was fortunate enough to be born in the US and also with, family here. And I also have heard similar stories from classmates about being separated either from their immediate family because of immigration, and also just the idea of struggling with identity, not seeing people in the entertainment industry or just any type of media that you consume and not seeing people that look like you or speak the same language or have similar culture. So I think a lot of AAPI youth and just AAPI in general can relate to your story, Christian. So thank you for sharing. And if you don't mind me asking specifically, because you had in your community that you grew up with really felt the pressure to assimilate, were there any traditions that you still kind of took a part in at home, Filipino traditions, or maybe it was some home cooked meals that your parents gave you? What helped you stay connected to your culture in a community like that where there were so many diverse people and cultures to learn from?
For me, it was definitely food. Food is one of my love languages in a way. I love sharing my food and Filipino food with other folks. And I was super blessed that my grandma, Lola, lived with us and cooked hella food all the time. And we would eat like with a spoon and fork. And I was surprised, like, people don't eat with a spoon and fork, like in terms of left hand a fork, right hand spoon, like, because you usually use a knife and spoon is for cutting meat, things like that. And then just little things like that made me like, oh, that's kind of cool, Filipino thing, or eat with our hands. And that was all contained within the home. And what I actually found helpful also, though, was once I got to high school there, I found all the other Filipinos. I was like, oh, you're Filipino? Like that. There was only like five of us, four or five, but I ended up visiting their homes nearby, just down the street from me. And then feeling that similarity was also helpful, right? Where there's a cultural aspect with Filipinos about family. Of course, it's not monolithic, right? Everybody has their own experience, but there is this emphasis on family connections, having multiple family members at home, having intergenerational homes, right? And that can be across different cultures, but it was very strong for me, right? The respect aspect, like always have to call my sister ate, which means older sister, or having that love for my lola, which means grandma. And that consistency definitely kept me rooted enough, even while I was trying to assimilate.
You were kind of talking about how when you were a child, you grew up in LA, and since
Mhm.
then, have you been able to sort of move around within California and find other communities? And was there a specific place that really spoke to you as home, and kind of how you've settled just kind of moving around California?
Oh, I like this question. I like this question. I lived in LA and I love the aspect of San Gabriel Valley. That's the home of 626 Night Market. Shout out to a lot of people say that is the home of boba in the US, because that's even back when I was in middle school, they were already selling it, right? And that was back in 20 or 2004, 2003, like that. And so now it's so established there in terms of the Chinese community having like a full-on development of restaurants. So I love that vibe. Then in my junior year of high school, I actually moved to Palo Alto, and that was a totally, completely different shift. Very well-off community, right? The mix of a lot of East Asians and like white folks in the area. And I was I was one of two Filipinos, I think, in that school. And so it was a totally different shift. And that really made me kind of realize the economic differences from my school down in LA, working class folks, where we had a closed campus. No one was allowed to leave during the day, versus once I got to Palo Alto, it was a open campus, right? You can come and go as you please, things like that. So that made me see the difference even within California. So I ended up moving back and forth down back to LA. And then eventually I found Daly City, which I really love. That's where we kind of put our roots down in 2013. And that's where I found community organizing. That's when I went back to college. And that's where I found the Filipino American community of organizers and activists. And it was a real blessing, because once I got here, I was like, wait, that guy looks Filipino. You're Filipino? And I would be at the mall. I was like, there's a Filipino restaurant. And I did not know the history of Daly City, where there's a book about it called Pinoy Capital. There's a huge concentration of Filipinos here, the largest, highest in the US, actually around 33%, at least based on the previous census. So that really made me appreciate the strength of an ethnic enclave, right? And of course, there's varieties in terms of how much a person identifies with being Filipino, right? Especially in Daly City. But it was a real blessing for me to even hear Filipino being spoken, Tagalog, Ilocano, in different spaces. So I think I've really come to love Daly City and appreciate it, and also want to protect it in that sense. So that's where my heart is right now.
I've been to Daly City plenty of times as well, and I feel the strong just Filipino presence, and just in general the food, and also just the community, like you were saying, just really tight knit, and it's great to be there in that city. So I can see why you love it so much, even from an outsider perspective, as someone who's not necessarily connected to that community. So you touched on a few points that will specifically bring us into the next section about education. So before we sort of talk a little bit about your educational journey, one thing that you did talk about was just the Filipino history in the United States. Actually, unbeknownst to a lot of people, I'm pretty sure you I've studied and looked through this a lot, is that the Filipino community actually has a long-rooted history in the United States, dating back all the way to the 16th century. And so were you able to learn about your ancestors at all in your high school courses or college courses? And kind of looking back, how important is it that we learn about the history of non-European settlers who shaped America?
Woo, super important. Great question. I appreciate the work you've done into putting this interview together and the questions, by the way. I just wanted to put that out because first off, I did not learn anything about Filipinos in high school except for the Filipino American quote unquote insurgency that they mentioned in a textbook in less than one paragraph, right? Context, this was high school. I graduated in 2009. So ways back before some of the more stronger pushes of ethnic studies in recent years, right? And so I was totally disconnected, did not know anything about Filipino American history until I picked up a book, I think in 2011 to 2012, which was a biography of Jose Rizal, who is a writer and one of the national heroes of the Philippines. And once I picked that book up, I was like, I should learn more about like Filipinos. And that's when I found out about the Filipino Community Center in San Francisco in the Excelsior neighborhood. And so that's what started my community organizing path. And from there, I found out about Skyline College and their Kababayan learning community, which is super dope, where you can take transferable classes within the scopes of history, English, sociology, and they're all focused on Filipino American history, culture, and context. So you're doing an English class, which transfers to the UC system, but it's by Filipino American authors, topics, books, things like that. And that really engaged me, where I was only thinking of taking 3 classes and only just staying for 1 semester and just kind of getting my feet wet and saying, all right, I just want to take these Filipino classes, right? And because it engaged me about what is my history here in the US or Filipinos in general. And so I ended up sitting in a room with Dr. Rod Daus Magbual, and he really talked about this one book called Coming Full Circle by Lenny Strobel. And she really said, hey, as Filipino Americans, you have to put yourself into these positions of power and influence so that others who look like you, who can relate to you, can envision themselves in those positions, right? Because I grew up never seeing a Filipino American teacher, right? I did not know any Filipino American businessmen in the US, right? In that context, and people who excelled. The joke has always been Filipino nurse, right? So that pathway, not that it's bad, right? That pathway though did not resonate with me. And so it's tough to envision yourself in those positions when you don't see yourself represented in those positions, and when you're constantly inundated by media that shows that you are other, right? And so that's what made me want to pursue a higher education and finish my stay at Skyline College, and then eventually transfer, right? So my educational career is very rooted in my experience with ethnic studies. And that's why, though my degree is not within ethnic studies, my heart is fully supportive and invested in ethnic studies as a whole.
You talked a little bit about your experience with ethnic studies, actually, as a class. In terms of how that specifically translated or maybe helped to influence your education at Berkeley, could you speak a little bit about sort of to reiterate, you decided to major in I'm blanking really
Social
quickly.
welfare.
Social welfare, and a minor in global poverty and practice.
Yep.
Right. Okay. Sorry about that.
No
But
worries.
yeah, if you could tie in a little bit about kind of your courses from Skyline, and then making the choice as a transfer student to insert yourself into those spaces, as you were saying, as a Filipino American, and making your voice heard and to empower others.
So for the decision to pursue social welfare, that was actually influenced a lot by my community organizing work, right? They're all linked together, kind of a web, right? How my ethnic studies classes impacted my desire to serve the community and to pursue education, while my degree is connected with my work with community organizations in Daly City and San Francisco, right? They all build upon each other. So I can't say that this is the reason I pursued social welfare, right? Because I was also helping co-facilitate an after-school high school ethnic studies class in Westmore and South City, and that really pushed my desire and experience to pursue something within the realm of social good. And in this case, Berkeley offered a social welfare degree, right? And then um, the global poverty in practice, that was a beautiful minor. I fully support. I know you're transferring to Berkeley. I fully recommend looking at that minor, right? And I really believe that there's a responsibility to connect education with service, so that it doesn't just stay within academia. And so that's something that I contended with while at Berkeley, because Berkeley, as a top institution, it is a research institution, and sometimes, not all the time, right? Sometimes it gets insular, and it gets, as the phrase, like the ivory tower of academia, right? How it kind of stays more so in the research and papers versus applied impact. So that was always my goal, to find what can I learn from Berkeley within these majors, and how can I apply it in actionable steps to provide material results for my community. And in this case, like the Filipino American community locally.
Great. I really liked how you mapped that out in terms of actually being a sort of a web of interests that led you down a certain path, but you were also very, I think, direct in the type of way you wanted to impact your community and a specific community. So I think your way of sort of coming to terms into how to connect education to your social work was really great. So it was really great to hear that brainstorm also as someone who is, going down the college path and thinking about careers and things like that. So it's really inspiring to hear. So while you were also at Berkeley, and correct me if I'm wrong, you also served with the Filipinx Academic Student Services, and you were a transfer retention coordinator. Could you explain a little bit about PASS and your role? And what did you find was the most rewarding about your work?
So PASS, Philippine X Academic Student Services, is one of the various retention and recruitment organizations under this group called Bridges, right? And they're focused on increasing the participation in higher education within their underrepresented groups, right? So we have the PASS for Filipino folks, BRC, the Black Resource Center, I believe, and then for indigenous groups, there's Inc. And sorry if I get some of the acronyms wrong, right? But that it's a collective coalition. So actually, I really enjoyed the collaborative part, right? Where PASS is, yes, we're focused on Filipino American student recruitment and retention. And I was very highly focused on the transfer students, since that's me, right? How can I support their transition onto campus? How can I get them actives and making the most out of the resources on campus? How can I help them have fun, right? That was my main focus, right? But I think the bigger part that I really enjoyed is building those collaborative bridges with, say, Raices, who were working with the Latinx community, and then some of the folks that I still stay in contact with, right? They're with the BRC, and it's just dope to see, right? Because we're all on a similar pursuing a similar goal, right, within our demographics. And you could argue, oh, you're just focused on your own, right? But to be able to see the shared struggle and at the same time the shared hope and the shared power that we have once we come together, that's a beautiful thing. So I enjoyed that. And I could feel myself getting emotional right now just speaking about it, right? And I really learned a lot from that space, right? So I believe in going very detailed with ethnic studies like Filipino American history. And I also believe in coalition building and stepping over those lines, right, that separate us, and then finding the similarities. So that was one of the biggest blessings and takeaways I've got.
Perfect. I couldn't agree more. And I think your work has definitely helped to achieve that in terms of bringing solidarity and unity in general within marginalized communities, or communities that need resources or support, and kind of holding each other's hand throughout that process. So I really love your energy when you're speaking about that, and I think this actually goes directly into the next question, which is about, obviously, besides supporting the Filipinx community, you've also, in your kind of professional career, also taken to support TPP Capital Holdings, which is also a Black-led investment fund. So could you give us a little bit, I know you kind of explained a little bit more, but about educating both communities and why it's so important that we work together, especially given this time of racial upheaval?
Awesome. So for context, I was a fellow for the Q1 Social Impact Fellowship with TPP Capital Holdings. They're a Black-led investment group based out of Philadelphia. And shout out, they have a beautiful campaign to develop this neighborhood called the Tioga District. And it's a community that is majority Black, but also low income and experiencing health outcomes that are unfavorable, right? And so they are putting together these funds and real estate developments in order to bring entrepreneurs into the area, in order to bring urban agriculture, indoor vertical farms to the area, healthier access to foods, right? And so their focus is Black and brown communities. And I've honestly learned so much from them, both from the mission aspect and also the logistical financial aspect, right? And connecting with that discussion of education, I am a really big supporter of financial literacy, education, and empowerment for Black and brown communities, because they have been historically excluded from that market, right? And our labor, our assets have been more so, I would say, controlled by, let's say, non-Black and brown folks, right? And so I think there is opportunity there. And in terms of building economic capital power, and also develop our communities so that folks don't have to move out. I'm actually a little sad right now, right? Ooh, I'm getting a little emotional because gentrification is hitting Daly City, right? I've had some friends whose parents had to move out of their homes that they've been in for decades because of the rising cost of living, because of predatory loans and predatory mortgages, because of a lack of financial education, right? And so the thing that I love about Daly City, the Filipinos are being pushed out because of economic pressures, because of a lack of financial literacy and education. And that angers me, right? And that saddens me. So that is something that I'm definitely passionate about. I still have a lot of learning to do, but I am really pushing that our community collectively learns and collectively develops this understanding and this power, so that our community and our elders are not pressured to leave, right? Pressured to find alternative places to live and options, right? So that is definitely one of the topics that is in my head in recency, and that I am consistently pushing for.
I appreciate you being very vulnerable and raw in this interview as well. I think it just shows how much passion and love you have for your community. So no apologies at all needed. And so although this is a heavy topic, obviously, for you in terms of just economic standing and being able to uplift communities, but you actually tackle with this on a daily basis as a person who works in the nonprofit and philanthropy sectors. So how has your work at Tide specifically kind of helped to use your values and your passions to better other communities or society in general?
If I get the boilerplate synopsis correct, Tides is a large philanthropic partner and nonprofit accelerator. So they actually provide HR and financial services and advice to a lot of nonprofits. They also help manage and funnel funds from whether that's wealthy or high net worth individuals or foundations into these nonprofits and progressive movements, right? And so I'm specifically within marketing and communications. So it does honestly feel somewhat more of a corporate gig versus my grassroots organizing from before, right? But the benefit of that is I can sit down and tackle more granular and specific work, right? So my strength is in project management, and I've been able to help push and publish articles and blog posts about very touching topics, right? One shout out is our PR strategist, Patty Poblete. She's a Filipino American mom and journalist, and she started a nonprofit against gun violence because her son was lost to gun violence, right? And that this story is beautiful, is being pushed out, being shared with thousands of folks, and is on the radar for these wealthy rich folks, right? To see and to push the conversation that we have to support organizations like this, right? And so while it's the nonprofit industry, I do have a love for it. It's also a larger discussion because it has become such a large industry, right? Some people who are critical of it say it is the nonprofit industrial complex, right? I have to throw this criticism in also. The Libra in me wants to be balanced, right? And so I do love the work that I'm doing. I do love the people I work with, right? And it is, though, an active effort is needed to find those points of contribution that can be impactful for my community, right? Like, for one example, a recent story was pitched to write about World War II veterans, right? And so I, in the seat of a project manager for marketing and communication, suggested, hey, can we also talk about the Filipino American World War II vets whose benefits were stripped away in the 90s, in the 40s, and only now 70 plus years later, they got their benefits, right? And so those are those little opportunities and those little wins, right? That it's important to find those, right, within the system and within the everyday, right? And so admit I'm still new with Tides and I'm still finding my voice and those opportunities, but I actively try to still stay connected with community organizing with my folks so that I can be grounded and find those little opportunities to contribute.
That's all really inspiring, Christian. And I can see how your background in grassroots and organizing, and just being a big advocate in general for your community has helped in inserting yourselves in the position of a leader, and also trying to impact things as a small scale or a large scale. So really commend your work there. And so while we're talking about that, I think something that you can definitely say that you wholeheartedly enjoy, and as a personal passion project, kind of supporting your community, kind of under the umbrella and branding of Kuya Chris. So could you tell us a little bit about the significance of that name, and just what really went through your head in trying to pursue a personal sort of impact project on top of a career that you have?
Cool. So, little funny story is the background of Kuya Chris. So, Kuya means older brother in Filipino, but also colloquially in the Philippines, you kind of call any dude that you don't know their name, like, hey, Kuya, Kuya, like that, like any person while at the mall or something, if you need to get someone's attention, Kuya, Kuya, right? And so, I'm very creative. I like making music, things like that. I had different stage names before when I was younger, some very embarrassing ones I won't share, right? But when I was doing community organizing in San Francisco, I was an after school youth mentor and working with youth from Balboa, right? And I remember there was this one moment where they called me Kuya Chris. And then it really it hit my heart in a way, because I'm the youngest in my family, right? So I had to always call my older sister Ate Sarah, my older brother Kuya Joe, right? I was like, damn, I want to be a Kuya, right? And so when I was doing community work, I started stepping into that older brother role. And I think I wanted to embrace it in a way that, hey, I'm being looked up as a mentor in some sorts, as an older brother. And it's a little reminder for me to to deliver on the responsibilities of a kuya, right? And of course, admittedly, it's a fun name, right? If you actually go on Instagram right now, start typing kuya, you'll see hella people with kuya something, right? They use their name, or they'll do like funny words, right? Like kuya lumpia, which is a food, right? So it's become a fun thing to use within the Filipino and Filipino American space, right? So I just decided, hey, I'm also in the marketing realm. Let me create this kuyachris.com. And that's become a platform for me to launch other projects, right? Like you said, I do have other side gigs. I import and sell coffee from the Philippines. It's also called Kuya Coffee, right? Got to stick with the branding, right? But that also is a social impact project where I donate $5 for every bag to on the ground orgs in the Philippines, right? So I'm always trying to find these interconnecting webs of support, right? Both it's entrepreneurship, it's social impact, it's supporting grassroots orgs in the Philippines, right? It's marketing, it's creativity, right? It's feeding my coffee addiction, right? So all these things are interconnected. And I really, even just talking to you, right? Like I see the importance of that interconnectedness, and I see the necessity though to hone in on the principles and hone in on what's important, because though that guides which webs to create, right? And for me, that is really based on family, community, service, and positive impact.
I love the branding. I love the idea. Just totally. I mean, like I've personally been on the website and I just love the content that's on there. And obviously you've put in a lot of work considering this is, a personal passion project that you don't necessarily get paid for. And it's just really shows, I think, how deeply you care for your community. And so I really think that it's an inspiring story. And obviously you also do things something similar in terms of like interviewing and doing podcasts and kind of staying connected to your own community and learning more. So yeah, I think in general, you have already stated what makes it so worth it and why you're continuing to do this. So if I may ask, what are maybe some of the future plans that you maybe are looking to maybe pursue in terms of projects, or kind of where you see this branding or your social impact projects in the long run?
I will share two kind of connected projects. One, I am still supporting an organization here called Filipino Mental Health Initiative of San Mateo County. And I believe it was last year, they got funding from the state to put up a social enterprise center, right? So basically a community center, but within it is a cafe that has youth workforce development and supports the community center, right? So that youth can have free mental health services, youth can have youth workforce development and learn entrepreneurship, learn marketing, learn sales, things like that. And I'm still very connected with that. So I'll be supporting them. I want to give that a shout out. And my future contribution is with them. I'm also doubling down on my coffee. So that's where it's at, and expanding the organizations that we want to support. It's been hard. Haven't been able to visit the Philippines recently because of COVID. But by the end of the year, I should be able to travel and visit the farms and give a little bit more report, because I also am trying to connect that business side, right, with real social impact, right? Not just marketing for social impact, because there's a lot of that going on, right? Like, look how much we've donated, right? But I want to help shift the conversation of businesses where it's not just profit, right? Like our impact has to be larger than profit. Yes, we can have a sustainable business where profits are made so that we can continue our work and provide good products, but who are we impacting along the supply chain? So I am definitely going to be active in the social impact space, both in my professional career and the side projects and businesses that I have. So keep an eye out on that. I request anybody and everybody who's interested within that realm to contact me, to shoot ideas around to for me to support them as well, I would love to.
Great. You've given so many shout outs during the course of this interview. And hopefully, yes, I think obviously he is a very personal person. Christian is here to, offer advice or just to get you involved. So actually, in terms of that, since you do have such a rich background just in social impact and also inserting yourself in spaces that people don't necessarily imagine to perhaps have a bigger social impact, whether that be businesses, for maybe youth who are feeling a little bit limited in their career choices and also feeling the incentive to also want to give back to the community. What advice would you give in terms of navigating those options and exploring a little bit about how you can connect your career to impacting for the greater good?
That's a tough question. And I will quote my friend, another shout out, Joseph Magsaysay, great architect. He says, I don't give advice, I give suggestions. So here are my suggestions, right? Start small and find what, it's a term, minimum viable product. That's a business term, right? But find what is the smallest thing that you could do to step towards that goal, right? I honestly started the podcast just me chilling at home. This was back in 2013, like talking to myself about learned lessons. I did not know it would morph into this community podcast where I have great teachers, counselors, artists on it, right? I just started small because it's something that interested me, right? And I would start small based on your interest, right? Whether that is coding, whether that is business, right? I'm so inspired to see younger entrepreneurs setting up IG pages with their products, right? That's a free thing to do, but you can gain some traction. You learn from using Instagram, and the big corporations now pay a lot of money for social media managers, right? So there's opportunities there. I will point out what you did say, though. It is a struggle when you don't see yourself in those positions yet, right? And what I would do is I would encourage folks to find communities, right? I was very blessed to be in a space in San Francisco and Daly City with a strong community presence, right? It's a little bit tougher, I'll admit, with with folks in other areas, but there are now some online tools, right? Even say Clubhouse, there's been hella Filipino rooms on there, right? Of course, I'm not on Twitter that much anymore, but I know there's ways to connect, right? Virtually. So find those. I highly recommend community organizing circles because you're surrounded by peers who are passionate as well. You can be inspired by peers as well, right? Not only the people who are already excelling, right? But feel free to learn and be inspired by your peers, right? Don't compete against them. This is from Kevin Hart. You're not in a competition against them, but you're in a competition with them, right? We're all here to excel and lift each other up with our success, right? And I really encourage folks to find those people who challenge you but support you, right? My small circle of friends, we make fun of each other and push each other to excel, but behind it is love, right? They want to see me excel. And so I'm very grateful for that. So surround yourself with those select people. And honestly, that's a learned skill in terms of picking the people you surround yourself with, but it is a skill that you can hone, and it's necessary to develop it, right? Because man, I have learned so much from my peers and the people around me, just as much as I've learned from mentors. And honestly, also for those older folks out there, I've learned a lot from people younger than me. So I want to encourage that as well. There's always learning and growth within community. And so approach it in that way. And that's where I think a lot of the questions can be answered, a lot of the intimidation can be overcome, and how some of the fears can be faced.
Those are great suggestions. I think I'm going to start using that. I like that. Yeah, suggestions and not advice, but I think everyone can take a bit of what you were just saying. And honestly, I think your spoken word is just very powerful. I hope that people can take away from that. And while you were on the topic, lastly, we'll talk about mentors, actually, as you were saying. So obviously you are, as I had repeated throughout this entire interview, an inspiration, of course, to your community and those who you love and surround yourself with. But who is someone that is your inspiration? And if we can end on that note, I think that would be great.
I have a lot, but to pick one that in recency has really touched both the professional side and also my heart in terms of inspiration is this poet named Kim Davalos. She is a counselor, college counselor at Skyline College. She's also a great poet. And she's self-published and recently just released a hardcover version of her book called Delilah's Daughter. So the reasons why: first, the professional side, great example of a Filipino entrepreneur who really pushed self-publishing, posters, shirt projects, all of these, right, on her own while working, right, while going through the academic side of getting her master's in counseling and excelling in that world, also creating time to have this creative outlet and also sustain it through entrepreneurship, right? That is very beautiful. The other part of it is she leads with her heart, both in counseling and in her books. And it's something that is very powerful and it's hard to explain in words. I've met a lot of leaders. I've met a lot of leaders who lead with their brain, and they're great, right? Very analytical. I've also met great leaders who lead with their heart and make sure that the person they're talking to is heard, is understood, is communicated well with, and we can connect with each other on a whole nother level when the heart is used, especially in leadership. And so I believe that she's a great inspiration for me. She's also recently shared with me about redemptive love, about how even in, this is a little simpy, in relationships, right? There's hard relationships that we go through, but there's also healing relationships that can come after. And of course, it's not only in romantic ones, right? Our family, sometimes we overlook the value of our family just because they're around us all the time, right? We go searching in other places, or at least I go searching in other places in romance, right? But what's right in front of me, I overlook sometimes. And having a friend like Kim Davalos who speaks on that is so beautiful and inspiring and grounding. So that she will be my last shout out of the day.
Once again, thank you so much, Christian, for just sharing your time and being able to, share your stories and also your messages to others, whether they be in the Filipino community or the AAPI community in general. I think obviously this interview has shown that you are rightly so an inspiration, and obviously inspirations are made by other inspirations in the community. Like you said, you just named one of the many that have impacted you and influenced you throughout your time as a student or even now as a professional. So yeah, a shout out to all of those people. Obviously we can't name them all, but yeah, just really thankful that you were able to join us today, Christian.